Xavier was the man who introduced Christianity to Japan for the first time, so let's start from his story. Xavier was born in Spain in 1506. He was very clever and studied at the University of Paris, immersed himself in philosophy. His roommate in the dormitory was a man named Loyola. He had a limp, but he was a cheerful man, and above all, he was really holy. Xavier was fascinated by him and wished to be like him. The seven men, including Xavier and Loyola, made a vow to devote their entire lives to God. This later became the Jesuits. A few years later, Xavier became a missionary. At the time, Portugal was looking for members of the Eastern Mission. Xavier and his friends immediately raised their hands. In 1541, the ship carrying them set sail. They traveled to Goa and Malacca. Goa was the center of missionary work in Asia. In Malacca, he met a Japanese man named Yajiro. Yajiro was a nice and funny guy, but sometimes Xavier couldn't understand what he was saying. Anyway, he thought that Japan must be a good place. In 1549, Xavier and his companions left for Japan. Yajiro, who had been baptized, went together as an interpreter. The voyage went smoothly and they finally landed in Kyushu. Xavier immediately asked permission from the local king and began to missionize. Gradually, the number of believers increased, but the local king changed his mind because there was another inherent religion. Yes, that is Buddhism. Xavier wanted to do something bigger. The whole archipelago had to be embraced with the love of God, so he thought about meeting the people in power. The powers in Japan at that time were the emperor or the shogun. For now, he decided to head for Kyoto. When he arrived in Kyoto, he went to see the emperor and the shogun, but it was denied. The reason was that Xavier was empty-handed. He had left souvenirs for the emperor in Kyushu. Xavier was careless. That was also his charm. Once Xavier returned to Kyushu, he took the souvenirs and went out again. Kyoto was too far away, so he went to see a nearby king, Ouchi, the king of Yamaguchi. Ouchi liked Xavier's souvenir very much. Among them was a pair of glasses. In fact, these glasses were the first ones brought to Japan. With Ouchi's permission, he began his missionary work in Yamaguchi. He received an old temple and converted it into a church. Xavier made 500 people into believers in 2 months. After that, he continued his missionary work in Kyushu and other areas. If he could make the king happy, all would be well. He got the key to missionary work in Japan. However, the political situation in Japan was not stable. Check the other video. One day, after 2 years had passed, he remembered Goa. There were many of his missionary friends. So he decided to return once to Goa. The missionary work in Japan was dedicated to priest Torres. More about Torres will be described later. Xavier took 4 Japanese boys with him to show them the wider world, and he sent 2 of them to study at the school in Goa. Xavier was relieved to see his friends. Now that Goa is okay, he wanted to go back to Japan, but he also wanted to see China, so he decided to go there. But on the way to China, he got sick and died. He was 46 years old. His body was moved to Goa by his followers. Everyone cried a lot. Xavier was a superhero among his friends. Let me introduce 2 episodes related to his death. A woman in attendance bit off 2 of Xavier's toes. After the woman died, it was returned. His right arm was cut off by the order. At that moment, fresh blood burst out of his body. It was 50 years after his death. People called it a miracle. His right arm has been kept until today, and on the anniversary, it comes to Japan. Now what happened to missionary work in Japan after Xavier's death? Xavier's successor, Torres, was an honest man. He followed Xavier's approach. He loved his friends and was admired by many people. Many churches were built in Western Japan. Not only citizens but also local kings were baptized by him. Christianity certainly began to spread in Japan. 18 years had passed since his arrival in Japan. He felt both physically and mentally exhausted. He requested the headquarters to replace him and retired. Then in 1570, he died in Amakusa. Torres's successor was Cabral. Cabral was a very smart man, but he was kinda mean. Cabral rejected Torres's approach. He discriminated between foreign missionaries and Japanese. He denied Japanese to take leadership positions. He didn't teach foreign languages to his Japanese followers and didn't study the Japanese language himself. Cabral met with Nobunaga, a leading figure of the time. He also turned several local kings into Christians. His methods were different, but the results were positive. However, a serious problem was emerging. There was a friction between the Japanese and Cabral. Cabral disliked the Japanese from the beginning. He told people around him like this: "The Japanese are arrogant, greedy, unstable, and deceitful." When I heard this, I got nervous. 1579, one man came from the headquarters. It was Varignano. Varignano distrusted Cabral's way. He then tried to revive the way of Xavier and Torres. Finally, in 1581, Cabral was dismissed and left Japan. Cabral then continued his work in Goa and died in 1609. Varignano focused on training Japanese leaders. For this purpose, he established several schools in Kyushu. Having successfully changed missionaries' direction, he also began to restructure their finances. Like Xavier, he wanted to show the boys the world. Then he came up with a plan. It was a study tour to Europe. 4 smart boys were selected. They left for Europe in 1582. Varignano accompanied them to Goa and stayed there. So Coelho would be in charge of missionary work in Japan. The 4 boys were able to meet the Pope in Roma. They learned a lot and set out for Japan. On the way back to Japan, the group stopped in Goa and met Varignano again. Varignano was impressed by the boys who had grown up so well. He decided to go to Japan again with them. In 1590, he came to Japan for the second time. However, the situation was changing. Coelho, who remained in Japan, continued his activities steadily. He had a good relationship with Hideyoshi. Hideyoshi was the ruler of Japan at the time. One day, the two quarreled because the Japanese were being sold into slavery by foreigners. That was true, but it was not clear whether the missionaries were involved in this. In any case, Hideyoshi was suspicious of foreigners in general. Finally, Hideyoshi issued a decree to expel the missionaries. This angered Coelho, and he called on the kings of Kyushu to support him. These were the kings who had been baptized. They would be on his side. Coelho asked Varignano for weapons, who headed to Japan. Meanwhile, the missionaries were refraining from activities, but they were not actually expelled. There is a reason for that. Hideyoshi was focusing on overseas trade. The missionaries were the contact point for this. Therefore, he couldn't ban them all. When asked for weapons, Varignano was annoyed. It was not a good idea to fight them with force, because we are missionaries, not soldiers. After returning to Japan, Varignano had a peace meeting. He gave some souvenirs and tried to make up with Hideyoshi, somehow. After the meeting, the missionaries were free to go out for a while. However, other problems began to arise, other Christian groups. The Franciscans and Dominicans came to Japan. They began to missionize in a different way than the Jesuits. In the case of the Jesuits, they first gave souvenirs to the local authorities, then they obtained permission. Only after that, they began to missionize to the people. But the new group was different. They went into the people from the beginning. They liked the poor and pure common people. The Jesuits and the new group didn't get along. It became impossible to say, "Love your neighbor." The new group got along well with Hideyoshi. They also built churches in Kyoto. They became rivals of the Jesuits. Under these circumstances, another incident occurred. It started when a Spanish ship drifted ashore in Japan. The ship was heading for Mexico, but was lost in bad weather. The treasures on board were confiscated by Hideyoshi. The sailors protested, but in vain. Then the angry sailors started to say something unnecessary. Japan is a small and weak country. Such a country will be easily conquered by foreign nations. How? Asked the samurai. The European way is this. First, they send missionaries to Christianize the country. Then they make the believers into soldiers and conquer the country. Hideyoshi was listening to this speech. He had been thinking about this possibility for some time. Finally, he made a decision to ban Christianity altogether. The missionaries in Kyoto were captured, including members of the Jesuits. 26 were executed. It was the first persecution that Christianity encountered in Japan. After this, Christianity in Japan entered a period of suffering. I will talk about it next time. Thank you for watching until the end. I'll be very happy if you like this video and subscribe to my channel. See you the next time.